Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event where we are launching Mushroom Health Science Australia. And you're all joining us from around the country, and we are thrilled to have you here. So I'd like to introduce myself before we start. I'm Dr. Emma Beckett. I'm from FOODiQ Global, so I'll be the host and a last-minute speaker today. So I would like to acknowledge that this event and the creation of Mushroom Health Science Australia was funded by Hort Innovation using the mushroom research and development levies and contributions from the Australian government. So for those who don't know, Hort Innovation is the grower-owned, not-for-profit research and development corporation for Australian horticulture, which does include mushrooms. And you can learn more by visiting horticulture.com.au. But we're very grateful that Hort Innovation has trusted us at FOODiQ Global to set up Mushroom Health Science Australia and to run this launch event today. So for the launch event, before I start, I do want to acknowledge the country that I'm on today and the country that you are all on. So we're coming from all around Australia and perhaps from elsewhere as well. I'm coming from Awabakal lands, and this is a beautiful shot of a local landmark that has a beautiful Dreamtime story. So if you look up Nobby's Head in Newcastle, Awabakal lands, there's a beautiful story about the exiled kangaroo that forms that landmark, which I think is a lovely connection to this country. So feel free to jump in the chat and acknowledge the lands that you're on today. So what are we here to do today? To launch Mushroom Health Science Australia and talk about the wonderful health benefits of mushrooms. So you can visit Mushroom Health Science Australia. It is live now at mushroomhealthscienceaustralia.org. And it's a resource that is created to support you as health professionals or whatever space you sit in the food and health and nutrition areas, to be able to access all of the latest and best science on the health benefits of mushrooms all in one place, hopefully in a way that you find fun and digestible. So for today's event, to give you a taster of all the things you might learn on the website, we have three speakers. So the first one was to be Dr. Flavia Fayette-Moore. However, at the last moment, Flavia has unfortunately been taken ill. So I'm stepping in a dual role today as host and the first speaker on her behalf. Then we will be having a in-kitchen presentation from Steph Geddes, who's a registered nutritionist and the founder of Body Good Food. And then we will be diving into some very specifics of health and mushrooms with Professor Velma Stonehouse, looking at specifics of the potential cardiovascular benefits of mushrooms. We're also going to have a quiz along the way. So if you have a second device with you, or you'll be able to do it on the computer that you're watching on as well, it just might take a little bit of moving between your different apps. We will have a quiz. So if you've got a mobile phone or an iPad or something, so you can have a separate device to participate in that quiz, there will be prizes. So get ready for that. So I'm going to do the first presentation today on behalf of Dr. Flavia Fayette-Moore, and I'm going to be talking about mushrooms and the future. So you will be able to ask questions of me and all of the speakers by asking questions in the Q&A. So you can use the Q&A box to ask questions, and then I can ask them of the speakers or answer them myself for my presentation. And you can use the chat to speak to each other, but don't put questions for me in the Q&A because in the chat, sorry, because I'll be flat out trying to check out the Q&A. So yes, let's do it that way. So I'll put on my speaker hat now and present to you on mushrooms and the future, as I said, on behalf of Dr. Flavia Fayette-Moore. Sorry, my slide changer. There we go. So since I'm presenting for Dr. Flav today, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Dr. Flav first. So Dr. Flav is my boss. She is the CEO of FOODiQ Global, and she is a nutrition scientist and space nutritionist. We call her our future foodie. So at FOODiQ Global, we are a flat structure, so we don't have job titles. We got to choose our own foodie names. And Flav is our future foodie. We call her the future foodie because she is very forward focused, including on how nutrition will work in space and how mushrooms will be part of that. She's been working in nutrition for over 20 years. She has at least 7 years of experience researching edible mushrooms. And she has a lot of very exciting stuff coming in this space. So she's been to International Space School and she is very interested in how mushrooms will be part of feeding the future here on Earth and in space. So I just wanted to say she might need to update this change maker in global human health to maybe universal human health. But she is doing lots of amazing things. So keep an eye out for that. And very sorry that she couldn't be here today. We weren't baiting and switching you for me. Flav really did try to be here, but unfortunately is just not well enough. So to mushrooms and the future. So from a very quick search on Google, you can, if you put in fungus and future, you can see there are so many different headlines. And those headlines are coming from all kinds of players. And this is including things as, mainstream as the New York Times and the BBC, as serious as the UN Development Programme, maybe as lighthearted as things like Country and Town House, like a lifestyle and design kind of magazine. Places like TED. TED are doing talks and writing articles on why fungi will exist in space. National Geographic, Australian Geographic, both are talking about mushrooms being part of the future and even inspiring engineers to build a better future. And in the middle there, we've got Stella McCartney and her 2022 campaign, summer campaign featuring fungi fashion. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about fungi fashion later. But this just goes to show, we at FOODiQ Global and Dr. Flav specifically, very interested in mushrooms and the future and mushrooms and space, but we're not the only ones. So this is a very exciting and upcoming kind of space. So really thrilled to be able to share it with you. So why are mushrooms so exciting? And they're basically so exciting because they are so unique. So if you look at, the evolution of life on Earth and moving from bacteria to archaea to plants to animals, then we've got fungi. They're not a plant, they're not an animal. They are their own thing, and they are a more recent branch of that evolutionary chain. And so that explains, biologically speaking, a lot of their really exciting properties that make them different to animal foods, make them different to plant foods, or different to bacteria and the things that they can do and produce as well. So mushrooms are really very unique, and they're much more closely related to animals than they are to plants, even though we consider them as a plant food when we talk about them nutritionally. So why is this important for space? So space and the space food system is very unique in that it needs to be reliable, it needs to be usable, it needs minimum resource intensity, and it needs to be safe. Now, I say that's very unique. Those needs are very heightened in space, but we also have those same needs here on Earth. We need a reliable, usable, resource sustainable, and safe food system at all times. And when we think about food in space and on Earth, we need it to be nutritious, we need it to be stable, we need it to be tasty, palatable, and we want a variety of foods and a variety of nutrients and bioactives in those. So you might not know this, but when we do space missions now, I say we, I've never been to space, but when astronauts go to space now, they are a food-first approach. So they don't actually take a large number of supplements to be able to sustain themselves in that space, that low Earth orbit environment. But the one supplement they do need to take is vitamin D, because there's inadequate vitamin D in the food sources that they take with them on these space missions. And this needs to be considered for future space missions, like hopefully going to Mars one day. And so right now, astronauts are supplemented with vitamin D as part of their space missions, and mushrooms could be part of solving this problem. Because you might know this already if you've been to any of the recent mushroom events or looked on the Mushroom Health Science Australia website already, but mushrooms can be a source of vitamin D because they naturally have ergosterol in their structure. And ergosterol is similar to the precursor sterol that we have in our skin. When sun hits our skin, vitamin D is synthesized, and mushrooms can do the same thing with this slightly different precursor. So by UV exposing mushrooms, and there's plenty of UV in space, we can create vitamin D and have a food-based source of vitamin D, which would be superior to giving the astronauts supplements. Superior because mushrooms are so much more than vitamin D. And so, replacing a vitamin D supplement with a vitamin D rich food brings all these other benefits. And it's exactly the same here on Earth. We can pop our mushrooms in the sun and they can produce the vitamin D, or we can buy the pre-UV exposed ones that come with that come already UV exposed in the supermarket. They're called things like sunny mushrooms or vitamin D mushrooms. We can get the vitamin D with all these other added benefits, with the nutrients in a low sodium form, low kilojoule form, vegetarian, with all the bioactives that come in mushrooms as well. And particularly important is coming along with that delicious umami flavor that mushrooms provide. So this is important to us here on Earth because umami, delicious. But it's particularly important in space because you know that when you go on a flight, your tastes change. Food doesn't taste as good on a plane. Same thing when you go up into space. But umami is special. Umami is retained in space for reasons I don't think we fully understand yet. And so by creating umami in mushroom-containing foods for astronauts, we could be enhancing the palatability, which is going to help astronauts stay nourished in space. Also really great for making things tasty here on Earth. But specifically in space, a low sodium diet is used as a countermeasure to the bone loss that happens in that microgravity environment. And so a low sodium diet is necessary in space. But we can see here from this quote from a NASA astronaut journal that when they found out that salt was not going to be part of the food that was being shipped to them in space, that they were not at all pleased because they need to be able to enjoy their food to eat it in space and stay nourished. And we need that on Earth here as well. And so mushrooms are a great way to boost the flavor of your savory dishes without needing to add that excess salt. So a really good salt reduction technique. Okay, so here are all the reasons why mushrooms are really great for space, whether it's a low Earth orbit mission, whether it's a lunar mission or a Mars mission that might happen, hopefully happens in the future, or even here on Earth, these same wonderful principles apply. So mushrooms require minimal inputs to grow. And a really awesome thing that they could do in this kind of closed system environment is they could use the wastes, the inedible wastes from other foods that would be grown to be their growth media. And they could also be a way of even recycling human wastes in that closed system environment. They are a massive reduction in area required compared to growing plants. So 33% reduction compared to plant crops when grown in those space conditions, because mushrooms can grow in a really flexible environment. So they can be grown vertically, they can be grown in an AI setup. There's people on Earth already who have done mycoponic setups where they're maintaining mushroom farms through AI. Very importantly for the space environment is they can be grown in systems that don't produce particulates, because we don't want to be producing particulates in a microgravity environment because very hard to get them back, can cause damage to astronauts and equipment. It reduces the amount of electricity that we need to grow food in space and for life support, because we don't need light to grow mushrooms. They can grow in microgravity, that has been shown already, and they're a really fast growing crop. They can double in size every day. And they're a crop that you can grow, pick, and eat without needing to do anything to process or change form already. And they're 100% edible, nothing that we need to throw away. And obviously, waste in space would be a big problem, and waste on Earth is a big problem too. Something really cool that's been researched lately is the way that mushrooms can break down other other matter and turn it into something usable. So if you think about space and, you know, the space dirt, space dust, space rock environment, and that rock is probably not ready to grow crops that can feed humans. But on Earth, they've modeled that kind of asteroid rock with what's called regolith. And regolith has been shown that if you use mushrooms, you can actually digest and break down that regolith. And they think that they're going to be able to do that and get that media ready to grow plants within a couple of years. And that's really exciting in terms of creating a space in space where we can actually grow food. Mushrooms are also really useful for construction and textiles, and this could be done combined with the regolith, so with what's already there, which means we need to take less to space to actually be able to build structures, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. And then we have the benefits that mushrooms have as a shield, protecting from the radiation that's in space, and the melanin in mushrooms can be used as a protective shield in this way. Kiara, I might need you to change the slide again. Sorry, darling. There we go. So this is an example of what's happening here on Earth already. On the left there are some bricks that NASA has made out of mushrooms, mushroom mycelium, yard waste, and wood chips, offcuts of wood. And they're making those bricks and demonstrating that you can use them to produce feasible structures. The red one in the middle there is where this has happened already in real life. So this is the front of an ice cream shop in Brazil, and this is a mycelium structure that has been used to make this front wall of this shop. So the mycelium being the part, the kind of the roots, imagine, of the mushrooms where the fruiting bodies grow from. I know biologically that's not a correct assumption, a correct description, but it makes sense to think of them that way. And then on the end there, we've got this French designer. We saw Stella McCartney with the fungi fashion before, but this French designer has used mycelium to make essentially a mushroom leather that can replace plastics or pleathers, or can be used as a leather alternative, and perhaps other materials as well. And you're probably thinking, Emma, we're here to talk about health science. Why are you telling me about construction and fabrics? But if you think about it, having a crop that can do more than one thing is part of our food security, our economics, and economic sustainability for our farmers, and is part of sustainability for using the bits that don't get eaten. So it means we're not putting anything off into waste if they can be recycled for these kinds of things. So that's actually really exciting that we can do this. And if we grow them in space or on Earth, we can be using mushrooms for really diverse purposes. Next slide, please, darling. So getting back to the actual health science side of things, mushrooms are also really exciting as a functional food. So Velma will talk more specifically about the second last one on this list, which is the beta glucans and their cholesterol lowering effects for cardiovascular health. But there's lots of other great things that are in mushrooms as well. And mushrooms are particular unique sources or high sources of a lot of these bioactives as well, because we know that food is more than just nutrients. So chitin is a key example, which is a prebiotic fiber with links to gut health, lower body weight, and reducing risk for cardiovascular disease. Polyphenols and flavonoids, which we often think of being in, eat the rainbow, very bright colored foods. But remember when we talk about eat the rainbow, white and mushrooms are a color as well. And the brown in the mushrooms as well is also bringing a lot of bioactives as well. So polyphenols and flavonoids being in our edible mushrooms. We also have our antioxidant bioactives and nutrients. So things like selenium and ergothioneine. So selenium, a well-known nutrient antioxidant. but also ergothioneine as an amino acid with antioxidant activity, and antioxidants obviously being very important for health promoting effects on Earth, as well as in space where that radiation needs to be countered. Ergosterol, we've already talked about with the vitamin D production, but ergosterol also, there is some evidence, emerging evidence, I will admit, from animal and cell models suggesting that ergosterol itself, even before it's converted to vitamin D, does have benefits for health, and potentially around cell membrane health, cholesterol reduction, antimicrobial, antioxidants, and anti-cancer properties, as well as potentially being part of treating liver diseases. So it's really exciting, the diversity of what's in mushrooms that comes from their uniqueness. Next slide, please, Kiara. So thank you so much. That was a bit of a whirlwind on where mushrooms might fit in the future, and I hope I was an adequate stand-in for Dr. Flavia Fayette-Moore, who could not be here today. Do connect with us at FOODiQ Global if you would like to learn more about mushrooms in the future, as well as Mushroom Health Science Australia, of course. Now, I did say you could ask me questions at the end, but I'm obviously having some problems with my Zoom controls at the moment. So I think what we will do is go straight to Steph in the kitchen, if we may, Kiara. Steph has a talk for us straight from her beautiful kitchen on all the wonderful culinary benefits of mushrooms and some great tips on how you can use them. Take it away, Steph.
Thank you, Emma, and hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Mushrooms have been one of my favorite foods forever, and it's known in my family that if we're heading out to a restaurant, I'm generally always choosing the meal that has mushrooms in it. And the more I learn about them, the more I love them. So I'm just really excited to be here with you today and show you some of my favorite ways that we can get the whole family embracing mushrooms. So I'm going to talk you through, I've got lots of recipes to share with you today, but I want to talk you through first kind of the whole process of mushrooms, from the buying to getting them home and storing them to then cooking them and what we can do with them. So if we start with where to buy them, the best thing about mushrooms is because they are grown in Australia in a controlled environment, it means that they're available to us all year round, which is fabulous. Now, because of that controlled environment, it also reduces that risk of any price fluctuations that might come from extreme weather conditions or natural disasters that can sometimes affect other produce. So it means not only are they available to us all year round, but they're also affordable for us all year round as well, which is wonderful. Now, when we're looking at where to buy them, the obvious one is obviously the supermarkets, but also don't forget about your local greengrocer and also your local farmers markets as well. So I love a farmer's market because I think it's really great to actually get to know the growers of our produce. And if you head down to your farmer's market, you might be able to meet your local mushroom grower, and they often have tips about what's good that day and how you can cook them and what you can do with them. And I think we always have so much more appreciation for our food when we've met the people who have actually grown it. So that's a good tip, to head down to your local farmer's market to buy them. And I just want to show you an example. This is a supermarket portobello mushroom. Now, supermarkets can be pretty fussy about the standards and the size of what their produce can be. And this one is one that I got from my local greengrocer here, who picks it from the local farms and delivers it. So you can see the difference there. You're just getting so much more bang for your buck in terms of what you're buying there. But obviously great, both options are super tasty and super nutritious, but just to show you the difference of what you can be looking at when you're going to a farmer's market. So once we've decided where we want to buy our mushrooms, let's talk about what we're looking for when it comes to mushrooms. Now, we're going to go over to my little fancy kitchen camera over here to explain this one to you. So what we're looking for with our mushrooms is kind of four main things. So the first thing is we want them to be dry, so we don't want any moisture there. We want them to be smooth. We want them to be firm and nice and plump. Now, for our smaller sort of mushrooms, so our button, our cup, and our brown Swiss, you can see here it's got this little what we call a veil, and that should be attached all the way around. It might be easier to see with this one. You can see that veil is attached all the way around, and that's what you want to look for with the smaller mushrooms. However, with our larger mushrooms, obviously that veil isn't attached anymore and we can see all the gills there. Now we want all the gills to be intact and you might see a little bit of moisture on these gills and that's okay for our larger mushrooms. But otherwise, in general, we're looking for smooth, firm, dry and plump mushrooms. Now, I will also say if you're going to the supermarket, and you're buying your mushrooms, I know it can be really tempting to go for the ones that are pre-sliced that you can buy in the little plastic tubs because you're thinking ahead, thinking that's going to save you some time. But I will say that that is the more expensive option. So the best way to go is the loose mushrooms, where you just grab your paper bag and you can serve yourself the mushrooms. When I looked up the price comparison this week, it was about a saving of $5 per kilo difference. So I think it is worth going for the loose option and serving yourself. It also means that you're getting it in the paper bag, which is great for storing it in, and we're reducing the plastic as well. So just a little tip to save yourself a few dollars. Now, when we do get those mushrooms home, let's look at how we want to store them. So the good thing about mushrooms is they're really easy in that you might see a little bit of, say, soil, and it's actually just pasteurized compost, which is what they're grown in. So it's not harmful, but obviously it's not something we want to be eating. So we don't need to wash our mushrooms with water. If it does have any of that pasteurized compost still on it, just get a little pastry brush or maybe just a bit of paper towel and just give it a sort of light rub to get off any of that compost that might still be on there. And then before we want to store them, Emma touched on the fact that they can actually generate vitamin D. So what we want to do is before we put them away, we want to get them out in the sun. I find it's best just to do all of your mushrooms when you get them home from the shops, because then you don't have to think about it every time you go to cook a meal during the week. And because it can retain that vitamin D for up to 8 days, it means that we can do it all at once. And you want to put them outside with the gills facing up. So gills facing up like this, or they can be sliced to increase the surface area. Put them outside for at least 15 minutes, let them do their thing and generate that vitamin D. And then, as I said, it will retain that for up to 8 days. So once you've done that, put them back in your paper bag, or if you did happen to buy them in a plastic or something else, it's best to get rid of that and maybe wrap them in some paper towel so it's still breathable. Pop them in the veggie drawer in your fridge and they'll keep for up to a week, retaining that vitamin D as well. So that's the best way to store our mushrooms. Now let's have a look at when it comes to eating our mushrooms, what is an actual serving size? So when we talk about just a standard serving size, we're looking at about 75 grams. Okay, so 75 grams. Now, it's going to depend on your mushrooms, how big they are as to what's going to be 75 grams. But what we say is that generally sort of 4, maybe 5 of our button mushrooms, so our smallest ones. And then for our Swiss brown or our cup mushrooms, 2 to 3 mushrooms here. And then for our larger mushrooms, it's just the 1 mushroom there. Now, the best thing is about mushrooms is, like Emma said, they're a zero waste food, which means we can actually eat the entire mushroom. So we know that the cap actually has more bioactives in it, but the stem actually contains up to 40% more of the soluble fiber. So both are incredibly nutritious parts to eat, and we want to make sure we're having both of them. Now, that means you can just slice up your mushrooms, keeping the stalk intact, and use them like that. Or if you were doing a recipe that was, say, like a stuffed mushroom or something like that, you can actually snap off that stalk, but I would still suggest that you use it in the recipe. So maybe you finely dice that and add it to the mixture that you're going to stuff the mushroom with, or you could pop it in your fridge and use it in a recipe another time during the week. So the best thing I think about mushrooms is that they're so versatile. You can use them in so many different ways. Now, you can eat them raw, that is fine, but we know that when mushrooms are cooked, particularly when they're roasted or browned, you do get more flavour from them. So cooking them is always a better idea to get some flavour. And we know that their wonderful nutritional benefits are actually retained during cooking, and that's really good to know, especially if we cook them at a low heat. So we tend to say sort of low and slow with our mushrooms is a good way to go. In terms of how we can serve them or how we can cook them, you can do them diced, you can do them sliced, you can quarter them, you can halve them, or you can even do them whole. So if you're dicing them and you've got really good knife skills, do it that way. Otherwise, you can always chuck it in a food processor and dice it that way, or you could grab your grater and even do it that way. So lots of different ways that you can prepare your mushrooms. And the other thing in terms of versatility is that they're appropriate for so many different kinds of diets. So for any practitioners out there who might have clients on different types of diets, maybe it's a DASH diet, Mediterranean, maybe it's gluten-free, it's appropriate for all kinds of different diets. And if you're after a resource for that, there's a really good resource on the Mushroom Health Science Australia website. You can download the PDF and it's got all the different diets and how mushrooms can be incorporated into all of them. You know, particularly for vegetarian and vegan diets, where it can really bring that complex umami flavor, which can be lacking in those diets. So it really is super versatile and everybody can enjoy mushrooms. Now let's get on to the culinary side of things. So I want to talk about two things first. Now, in terms of flavor, the first thing is that the more mature your mushroom, the more flavor it's going to have. Now, I will be honest and say I didn't even know this before I started researching for today's event. But when it comes to your mushrooms, all of our common mushrooms, which we find at the supermarket or at the shops, are actually all the same mushroom, but they're just harvested at different times to get different sizes. So I think that's pretty fascinating. So we obviously have our button mushroom here. That is our white variety. And then we have our cup mushroom, which is also the white variety. And then, yes, we've got a flat one there. I'll bring a portobello over here. And then we have, so this side here is all our white variety of the mushroom. And this side is our brown. So our Swiss brown mushroom and then our portobello. So in terms of the white variety, the button is harvested first for a smaller mushroom. And then we have the cup mushroom. And then for the more mature mushroom, we have the flat mushroom. And same with the brown Swiss. This one's harvested earlier and the portobello is harvested later. So we know that these bigger mushrooms are going to have more flavor. But I think it's really interesting to note that, because if we've got people in the family that perhaps aren't really in love with mushrooms yet, then we might want to start with some of these smaller varieties that are a bit more mild in flavor. So dicing them up, using them in your recipes where the flavor won't be too noticeable. But then for those mushroom lovers, then we can really embrace the bigger, more mature mushrooms to get more flavor out of them. Now, another trick when it comes to getting the most flavor out of your mushrooms is something I want to talk about in regards to sauteing mushrooms. So, yeah, when it comes to sauteing mushrooms, I think it's a pretty common way that people prepare their mushrooms. You know, there's so many ways you can serve them. You can serve them with your eggs for breakfast. You can put them in a wrap or a toasty for lunch. You can put them on a Buddha bowl for dinner. You can even just serve them on their own as a side with other things to serve alongside it. You know, you've got some sauteed mushrooms. You could add some goat's cheese and pine nuts, or do it with some Parmesan cheese and thyme. There's so many different ways you can do it. But when it comes to sauteing your mushrooms, there's a little bit of a trick. So when you add your mushrooms into the pan, if you add your fat straight away, so that might be an extra virgin olive oil or a butter or a ghee, whatever you've decided to cook with, if you add that straight away, what actually happens is, because mushrooms have such a high water content, that water will start to come out, and the water actually lowers the temperature of the fat, meaning that it can't get to the high temperature it needs to actually have that browning effect. So instead, what we want to do is add the mushrooms in, and we want to add them in dry to start with. Once you start cooking them off dry, you'll start to see their water coming out, and that water will start to evaporate. Once that's happened, then you go in with your fat. Then it can reach that high temperature where you can really get that browning effect, because we know that that browning effect or that roasting is where we bring out that maximum, that beautiful umami flavor. So I just want to show you an example. Now, this was done this morning, so they're not super fresh and it might be hard for you to tell, but this is two examples of the sauteed mushrooms that I'm talking about. So this one here, you can see that there's not a lot of browning going on. Yes, they are cooked. They would still be delicious, but you can see it's more of kind of like a grey colour. There's not a lot of vibrancy, not looking super delicious there. So that was the one where I added the fat straight away. Both of these options were cooked for about 8 minutes. Now this one here, you can see that there's much more of that sort of browning going on, particularly on all the edges of the mushrooms. And there's a much more sort of darker color there. So you can see that browning and roasting effect has really happened there. And that was when the fat was added afterwards. So that's just a little tip for you to get a bit more flavor out of your mushrooms. Now, in terms of recipes, if you head over to any of the mushroom websites, but particularly there's got recipe symbols on the Australian Mushrooms website. There's recipe symbols next to all the different kinds of mushrooms as to what's an appropriate way to cook each different kind of mushroom. Now, I think, that can be helpful if you're new to cooking mushrooms, but to be honest, they're so versatile. I think they honestly go with everything. So today, I'm going to share with you a few recipes that are my sort of family favorites and ways that we can really get the whole family embracing them. Now, the first one I want to talk you through is a technique called the blend. Now, you may have heard of this. The reason we love it is because it means you don't have to start adopting any new recipes necessarily. You can use the recipes that you already love and use in your household, and you can just start to sub in mushrooms. So it's basically any recipe where you would use mincemeat. So any recipe that uses mincemeat, you want to take out some of that mincemeat and add in some diced mushrooms instead. It's just a perfect way to get more nutrients in, but obviously it blends in so that if people are new to mushrooms or they don't accept mushrooms just yet, they may not even know that it's in there, but they're still getting the nutritional benefits. So one example I have for you today is a Mexican bowl. So you can see here, I've got the Mexican mince here. I took out half of that mince. I popped it in the freezer, which means that I'm saving myself a bit of money because I'll have that for next time I want to cook. And then I put in some mushrooms in there. It's also got onion, garlic, capsicum. I have added some black beans because, yes, if we are taking out some of the mince, we will be losing a little bit of that protein. So this one actually has black beans in there. You could also add things like lentils as well if you wanted to add the mushrooms but still get a little bit more protein in there. And then obviously served with all our colourful veg and some whole grains as well. So that's just one example of how you can do that blend technique, but you could do it with spaghetti bolognese, you could do it with shepherd's pie, you could do it with burgers, any other kind of recipe like that where you could use that blend technique. Now, the next recipe I have for you is again using like a diced mushroom. This one here is my chicken noodle soup. Now, this has to be, I think, one of the most popular recipes on my website. It was designed when I was feeling a little bit under the weather, and all I really felt like was a nice, comforting chicken soup. And I knew that if I could get mushrooms in there, especially those vitamin D mushrooms that I put out in the sun, I was going to be getting that vitamin D to help support the immune system. But you've got in there also, you've got your chicken, your beautiful mineral-rich broth, you've got carrots, onion, lots of garlic, lots of ginger, lots of turmeric. And because the veggies are all diced, it's done all in the food processor, so it's super easy. Often kids don't actually understand that they're actually in there. And, mostly what you can see is noodles and chicken. So that can be a really family-friendly recipe to start introducing some mushrooms as well. And the last one is a little bit different. You may not have seen this before, but these are mushroom brownies. Now, I know you're probably thinking, oh gosh, beetroot in brownies, black bean in brownies, chickpeas in brownies, what else can we possibly add to brownies? But now that you've heard about all the wonderful nutritional benefits of mushrooms, I think you might be inclined to add them to your brownies next time you do it. Now, I will say, don't knock this till you try it. I was a little bit sus. This is a recipe from the Australian Mushroom Growers website, so you can head over there to get the recipe. But it's actually super delicious, and you can't even tell that the mushrooms are in there. You can see this one actually has walnuts in it. You could leave the walnuts out if you wanted to make them nut-free for lunch boxes. But you can see they're super fudgy, really delicious. I even halved the sugar content of the recipe, which I do with a lot of my baking recipes, and they were still really yum. So one that you might want to start off trying, which you might have more luck with getting the family to eat, is some brownies. Now let's move on to some different ways that we can serve the mushrooms. So the next one I want to look at is some really easy like midweek meals when it comes to family favorites. So one thing I have here, and this is similar to a Justine Schofield recipe from the Australian Mushroom website. And this is tacos. I love tacos. Such an easy recipe midweek. You can pull it together in no time. And of course, we probably haven't thought about putting mushrooms into our tacos. So you could do a diced up mixture, mix it in with other things to go in your tacos. I've actually just done the mushrooms sliced and then sauteed them on both sides and put them in. This is with some rocket, some cucumber, some avocado, it's got mushrooms, and then like a chipotle mayo on top. You could add your choice of protein to that. So whether that be like a crumbed chicken or maybe some fish, some tofu or some tempeh, and that would be really delicious. I love tacos because you can kind of let everyone serve themselves as well, which is often good for kids. So then the next one that I have here is a one tray bake. And this is a Jamie Oliver recipe. You can see here, it just looks so delicious. I mean, two of my favorite things, right? Jamie Oliver and a one tray bake. How can it not be good, right? So we know that we have minimal dishes when it comes to this. This is a great recipe. It was rice, it was whole chicken thigh. And then you can see in here, I've put a mix of different mushrooms. So I put some portobello in there, which I've just quartered. I've put some whole brown Swiss. I've put some cut mushrooms in there. You could even, go a bit exotic if you wanted to and use shiitake or other things you might get your hands on. There's spinach in there, there's butter beans. And it actually also uses a mushroom soup as part of the base to cook the rice in. So a mushroom soup, just a pre-packaged one that you can buy. I looked at the ingredients to check that there was an all sort of clean ingredient list, which was good. I think it was the Australian own organic brand, perhaps. That with a bit of water, cover it in foil, pop it in the oven, literally set and forget, come back and you've got dinner ready. So that's a really easy one for a midweek meal. The next one is one of my favorite ways to have mushrooms, and that is a mushroom burger. Now, what I've got here today is all the things that we can use to build a mushroom burger. Of course, another great one to do with the family where kids can serve themselves. It means they have a bit of control over what they're serving themselves, and they do tend to be a little bit less fussy if they can choose what they're having. So you can put out all kinds of different ingredients, but as an example of what I'm showing you today, I've got a whole grain bread roll here. Let's just build it while we're here. We've got that. We've got halloumi. I had some lettuce from the garden there, then halloumi, and then we've got our mushroom. Let's go on with some avocado. And then I've also got some caramelized or balsamic caramelized onions there. Let's build that up. Put this on top. And that looks so delicious. So an easy burger, again, you could add some mayonnaise. I would also love to add some kimchi to this. I think kimchi and mushrooms go together so well, or any other kind of fermented veggie would be really nice with that too. And so after our family-friendly recipes, I now want to focus a little bit more on kids specifically, because we know that with kids, they can be fussy, they go through phases. Don't worry, I'm a nutritionist and I'm not immune to having a fussy eater at home. But I think we need to remember that two things are important with kids. Exposure is one, and also making food fun is another one. So I want to show you a couple of ways that you can start introducing or exposing your kids to mushrooms that's a little bit more fun and doesn't mean that they have to be confronted with trying a mushroom at the table. It might just be playing around with mushrooms, getting used to them, showing them at the supermarket, getting them to unpack them, tell them about how we sunbake our mushrooms. My kids always find that so funny that I like to sunbake my mushrooms and then we put them back in the fridge. But here's a few ways that we can get a bit creative. One of them is doing it with skewers. Okay, so making a skewer, changing it up with some mushrooms and some different ingredients that they already accept and love. You can just pop that on the barbecue and cook it away. Then we have, now look, I like being in the kitchen, but I'm not a craft mum, so don't come at me for my animal phases. But hopefully you can see there, we've got a bit of a monkey there, making faces with them, getting creative, getting them to just play with the food before they even have to start trying to eat them or taste them or anything like that. Then I've also done a crispy air fryer mushroom. So what I've done here is coated the mushroom. I cut it in half. I coated it in an egg wash, and then I coated it in a wholemeal breadcrumb mix. I popped that in the air fryer, 180 for 10 minutes, and it made it super crispy on the outside. I know for me, that would be a big tick for my son because he has a few sensory challenges and he loves crunchy things. So mushrooms can be a bit of a difficult texture for some people, but if we can try and do it in different ways that they might accept it with textures that they love, then that's a good way to start to introduce it. And this is another recipe. This one is from the Australian Mushroom Growers website as well, but this is a mac and cheese stuffed mushroom. So I thought that recipe was a good one where you can go, okay, I know my kids love mac and cheese. How can we change it up and see if they'll eat it if it's exposed to a new food in the way of stuffing it in a mushroom? So that's just a few sort of fun ways that we can start to embrace them with kids. And the last one I have here is some lunchbox options. So how can we get mushrooms into our kids' lunchboxes? This can be done through different ways, whether the mushrooms are visible or whether they're not, means we can still get the nutritional benefits in once they're accepting the mushrooms, but we can still get them in even if they're not. So the first one here is a rice paper roll. So I'm stick to the board a bit. I've used sauteed whole slices of mushrooms, but you could do a mixture of like diced mushrooms with maybe some tofu, some onion, garlic, and a bit of soy sauce, and that could go into your rice paper roll. A pizza is always such an easy one. I know this is a guarantee for getting mushrooms into my kids. We dice it up finely with some onion, some capsicum, tomato paste on the bottom, cheese on top, and that's so simple. Pizza is also delicious cold, arguably even more delicious cold, so they can take it in their lunchbox the next day. These are some little scrolls. So these ones are pesto, feta, and mushrooms. So this is a good one, super easy to make just with some puff pastry and can be taken in a lunchbox. And then we have a little frittata here as well. And this one has mushroom, thyme, and some Parmesan cheese. So they're just a few different ways. Hopefully it's given you some ideas about how you can start to embrace mushrooms in your family. And remembering that we can start with the more mild ones and build up to the more flavour mature mushrooms when we're ready for it. So thank you for joining me today. I couldn't actually see in the chat if there were any questions. So if Emma has any for me, she can ask away, or we can always do them later on as well.
Thank you so much, Steph. I think because I did my little technical difficulty before, I'll get everyone back together and I'll do all the questions at the end. Thank you so much. That all looked delicious. I know you said they were for kids, but those macaroni and cheese stuffed mushrooms definitely made me regret making this a lunchtime event because my stomach growled so much when you shared those. So thank you. We'll bring you back for questions afterwards. So now, after my technical difficulties earlier, I'm terrified because this next section has real potential for technical difficulties. So what we're going to do is, because we're talking about education and knowledge and awareness of mushroom benefits today, I would like to do with you all a mushroom quiz. The mushroom quiz. It's a countdown, and the first question will come up. The first question is, what is the scientific name for a portobello mushroom? Is it Agaricus Bisporus? Is it Amentina phalloides? Is it Pleurotus orostratus? Or is it Philomena filiformis? And most of you are correct. It is Agaricus Bisporus. And fun fact, all of our common mushrooms in Australia, our white button mushrooms, our cup mushrooms, portobello, Swiss brown, flat and barbecue, they are all Agaricus Bisporus, just in different colours and different maturity levels. So well done to the 28 of you who got that right. If you didn't know that, don't worry, there's plenty more questions and you have time to catch up. Well done, Paula, who must have been the fastest and also correct. Question number 2. Chitin, hemicellulose, alpha and beta glucans, mannans, xylans, and galactans are examples of what? Are they antioxidants in mushrooms, nutrients in mushrooms? Are they not found in mushrooms, or are they prebiotics found in mushrooms? I gave that away before. They are prebiotics found in mushrooms. Nutrients, I can see why people went for that. And some of them will have antioxidant properties as well. So well done, those who got that right. Let's see how it affected the leaderboard. Paula is still slaying. Well done. We'll go to the next question. Where do mushrooms sit in the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating? Are they fruits, vegetables? Are they with the meats, legumes, etc.? Or is it not specified? And nearly everyone got that right. Yes, they do sit in the vegetables group, despite not being a vegetable, despite not being a plant, but they were put there because they have the most similar nutrient properties to the vegetables. But we do know the use of them is so much more versatile than that. Paula really wants that crumble frying pan and cookbook. We're still in the leaderboard, but Meg's coming up behind. Plenty of time. When are Agaricus Bisporus mushrooms in season in Australia? All year round, spring, autumn, or summer? All year round, of course, because we can grow them indoors and we can grow them in all kinds of environments. So we don't need to worry about when we have our mushrooms. And Meg has come from behind and Paul has dropped down to third place. That's exciting. And this is our second last question. UV exposed mushrooms could specifically help address deficiencies of which vitamin? Vitamin A, K, E, or D? That's right, because you were all definitely listening. Yay! 100% correct rate. Oh, no, sorry, one person. Ooh, sorry. Yeah, vitamin D in the sun, ergosterol, produced just like our skin. Exciting. Meg is still in the lead. Paula, you're still in third place. And we've got Prue in number 2. Last question. Mushrooms are a good source of, being 10% of the DI based on RDI, of which of the following vitamins? So we've got, this is going to be too long for me to read them all out, but find the list there of which vitamins you can get from your mushroom in good sources. And we've all done, ooh, we went for E, K, and D, but it's actually niacin, pantothenic acid, biotin, and folate. So only 5 of you knew that. So definitely visit the nutrients page on Mushroom Health Science Australia to learn more about that. So let's see how that last tricky one changed the leaderboard. In third place, we have Paula. So Paula, make yourself known in the chat so we can find you in real life to get your prize. Prue in second place, well done. And did Meg stay on the podium for number 1? Yes, she did. So ladies, well done. Make yourself known in the chat so someone from the FOODiQ Global team can find out your real life identities, because these are not your full names. And we can get those prizes out to you. So thank you so much, everyone, for playing. I found that exciting, but I'm a massive mushroom nerd. So yes, I'm back. And now I get to throw to our final speaker, who is Professor Velma Stonehouse, who has adjunct professorships with the University of South Australia and QUT. And she has previously been she's the immediate past president of the Nutrition Society of Australia. So I know her as our fearless leader for so long in the nutrition science space. She's such a wonderful person as well. And I'm really thrilled that she's here to speak to you today specifically about the cardiovascular potential benefits of mushrooms. So thank you so much for being here. Over to you, Velma.
Thank you, Emma, for that introduction. So after all of that, we are now moving into more specific and around scientific evidence, and in particular, cardiometabolic health. Next slide, Chiara. So coronary heart disease continues to be a really important disease to consider. Despite reductions in its rate over the last 2 decades or so, it is still the leading cause of burden and mortality in Australia and globally. And diet and lifestyle are fundamental in reducing the risk and preventing coronary heart disease. And we can affect risk factors like dyslipidemia, hypertension, hyperglycemia, obesity through dietary interventions. Now, so it's important to look at what the scientific evidence for mushrooms and coronary heart disease, and the evidence is emerging. Next slide, Chiara. So there are many ways that mushrooms can contribute to a healthy heart dietary pattern. Firstly, by helping to reduce saturated fatty acids. Because of its consistency and its taste, it could help to reduce meat intake in the diet, and in that way, it can reduce saturated fatty acids, which we know is an important dietary guideline for reducing risk of coronary heart disease and lowering blood cholesterol levels. Mushrooms is also a source of potassium in levels that is equivalent to that in bananas on a weight for weight basis. And we know that potassium is important for blood pressure lowering. As we've talked before in the session, it can help to reduce salt intake because of its umami, savory taste. It can reduce salt, and in that way, it can reduce risk for high blood pressure. It is a source of beta-glucan, and many of us would be aware of beta-glucan in oats and barley and their cholesterol-lowering effects. Fewer people are aware that mushrooms are also a good source of beta-glucan, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later in my talk. As you've just heard from the quiz, mushrooms are a good source of prebiotics like chitin, hemicellulose, alpha-beta-glucan, etc. And Prebiotics may affect coronary heart disease through modulation of the gut microbiota, which in turn may affect cholesterol regulation, glucose control, inflammation, and also improve the gut barrier function. Mushrooms is also a source of antioxidants, including ergothioneine, and in reducing oxidative stress, it reduces the risk of heart disease. And we've heard a lot about the canned mushroom that is high in vitamin D, and vitamin D is also associated with reduced risk for heart disease. Next slide. So how does the scientific evidence stack up? The evidence is emerging and limited. There are a few systematic literature reviews that suggest that there are some evidence for favorable effects on lipids, blood pressure, inflammatory markers, and glycemic control. There are limited observational studies, and in many cases, the observational studies weren't, or the associations between mushrooms and heart disease weren't planned prospectively, resulting in intake measures that do not provide the information that we need to be able to investigate this. Many of the reviews pool different mushroom species, and we know that different mushroom species potentially differ in their cardiovascular effects. And it also pools forms of mushrooms like components or bioactives that are extracted from mushrooms, or dried powders or fresh, and the effects may be different depending on the form. Most of these studies are animal and cell-based studies with very few clinical trials, and several are of low quality. So in general, the strength of the evidence is weak because it is inconsistent, insufficient, and of poor quality. Next slide. So I want to focus on 3 studies that look at Agaricus Bisporus mushrooms. As you've heard, they are the common mushrooms like button and cup and portobello and brown mushrooms, etc. So the first study is probably the only clinical trial on Agaricus Bisporus. It was a non-randomized trial. In this trial, they looked at Agaricus Bisporus that was fried in olive oil, and they compared that to a usual diet for 30 days. They showed a reduction in the lipids, or improvement in lipid profiles, but this study is criticized because it was not randomized, and because it is impossible to say whether the effects we've seen are due to the mushrooms or due to the olive oil, because they were combined in the intervention. The second study was a randomized crossover acute study where participants consumed test meals that included 0, 8, or 16 grams of Agaricus Bisporus powder. The main goal of the study was to look at ergothioneine bioavailability, which they confirmed in this trial, but they also showed a trend to blunt postprandial triglyceride responses. And this is an important effect because increased postprandial triglyceride lipoproteins causes increase in oxidative stress and inflammation, which affect vascular function and therefore contributes to atherosclerosis. The third study was a recently published trial, randomized controlled trials in healthy adults. Older adults who were overweight, they consumed Mediterranean diet with or without 84 grams per day of button or Western mushrooms for 8 weeks. They showed a reduction in fasting glucose, but did not show any effects of mushrooms on blood pressure, lipid profiles, insulin resistance, and inflammatory markers. It's important to note that this study included healthy people, so people who had healthy cardiometabolic profiles at the start of the study, and it's almost impossible to improve a level that's already healthy in a period of 8 weeks. And the amount of mushrooms were probably also too small to show an independent effect in only 8 weeks' time. Next slide. So this brought us to the project we conducted at CSIRO looking at mushrooms and LDL cholesterol lowering. As I mentioned before, mushrooms is a good source of beta-glucan, and beta-glucan in oats and barley are well known for their cholesterol lowering effects. regulatory bodies in Australia, US, and Europe, and other jurisdictions have authorized health claims linking beta-glucan with cholesterol lowering. But these health claims only apply to oats and barley. It does not apply to mushrooms. Now, for those of you who have done undergrad training in nutrition, you may remember this mechanism. The primary mechanism through which beta-glucan lowers cholesterol levels is through the enterohepatic circulation. What happens is that the liver uses cholesterol to produce bile acid. When food is present in the small intestine, the liver secretes these bile acids to help to emulsify the fats and for it to be taken up by the endothelial cells. The bile acids are then reabsorbed and taken back to the liver to be stored in the gallbladder. When beta-glucan is present in the small intestine, the beta-glucan binds with the bile acids and results in the excretion of the bile acids. That means the body needs to make new bile acids, and it does that by using cholesterol levels. The levels of cholesterol in the liver reduces, and it takes up cholesterol from the circulation to replete those cholesterol stores. So the result is a reduction in circulating cholesterol levels. Next slide. But the beta-glucan structure is different in mushrooms and oats and barley. In cereals, the glucan structure is more linear, contains beta 1 to 3, 1 to 4 glycosidic linkages, whereas in mushrooms, it is branched. So it contains, in addition to the linear 1 to 3 linkage, it also contains a short branched 1 to 6 glycosidic linkage. It is unknown whether the cholesterol lowering properties differ because of this structural difference. Next slide. So this is what we wanted to investigate in our project that was funded by the Hort Innovation Mushroom Innovation Fund. We aim to build the scientific evidence for cholesterol lowering effects of Agaricus Bisporus mushrooms. This project was planned in 2 phases. The first phase was an in vitro study where we compared mushrooms with oats, and we quantified the beta-glucan content of Australian mushrooms. And secondly, we evaluated the bile acid binding capacity of mushrooms. So as I said in my previous slide, this is the primary cholesterol lowering mechanism for beta-glucan. Unfortunately, the randomized control trial was not undertaken. And also just noting that this phase 1 result has been published in the Food and Function Journal. Next slide. So what did we do? We analyzed the beta-glucan in freeze-dried, raw, and cooked mushrooms. And we looked at boiling and frying. Boiling resembles mushrooms added to risottos, for example, or stews. And of course, frying is a popular way of cooking your mushrooms. We looked at Agaricus Bisporus button cup flattened brown mushrooms. And we also analyzed pleurotus mushrooms, including shimiji and oyster mushrooms. And while we analyze these in the freeze-dried form, we are reporting them in the fresh form as well. We analyzed the bile acid binding capacity using an in vitro digestion simulation assay. And we did this in raw and cooked mushrooms. Next slide. So this diagram resembles the result, and I will slowly take you through it. So on the left-hand side, you have the different mushrooms that we've analyzed. At the top, we've got the Agaricus Bisporus mushrooms, button cup flattened brown, and then the shimiji and oyster mushrooms, and at the bottom, we've got oats. Next is the amount of beta-glucan in these mushrooms, and note that these are expressed as per 100 grams of dried weight. So in the freeze-dried form, if you look at the Agaricus bisporus mushrooms, beta-glucan levels were between 5 and 8 grams, and that is comparable to that of oats that had a beta-glucan content of 8 grams. The Stamigi and oyster mushrooms were 5 times higher in beta-glucan than the other mushrooms. Now, looking at the bile acid binding capacity, look at the green bars, and this is raw mushrooms. So again, in the Agaricus bisporus mushrooms, ranging from 29 to 36%, it is similar to that of oats at 36%. But interesting, the bile acid binding capacity of Stamigi and oyster mushrooms were much lower than that of the Agaricus bisporus mushrooms, about 1.5 times lower. Looking at the effects of boiling on bile acid binding capacity, you can look at the colored bars. And again, boiling actually increased the bile acid binding capacity. And this is probably more due to greater levels of beta-glucan in these samples as a result of boiling, because the results are expressed per 500 milligrams of dry weight, not per beta-glucan amount. So to summarize, Agaricus bisporus had similar beta-glucan and bile acid binding capacity compared to oats. Pleurotus mushrooms had 5 times more beta-glucan, but lower bile acid binding compared to oats. And we estimated that you'll need to consume about 3 times more beta-glucan from the Pleurotus mushrooms compared to that of oats and Agaricus bisporus. What was not shown in this diagram was that boiling, but not frying, increased beta-glucan levels in some mushrooms by 3 to 7%. Cooking increased bile acid binding capacity. But what is very important to remember is that these results are per the dried weight. Mushrooms are high in moisture content, 88 to 93%, which requires a larger intake in its fresh form. Next slide. And maybe also go to the next one, just to save a bit of time. So, while we are still needing more evidence, incorporating mushrooms, there's many reasons for incorporating mushrooms into a healthy diet. And the food choices high in beta-glucan is limited. It's basically oats and barley and a few other sources. So mushrooms is a good, viable alternative to increase beta-glucan content in the diet. To obtain 1 gram of beta-glucan, and this is the amount required in a serving of oats and barley products to allow a health claim, you'll need to consume, when looking at button mushrooms, 150 grams of raw mushrooms, less when it's boiled. This is equal to about 1.8 cups of raw mushrooms and about 9 button mushrooms. But this amount may differ depending on the size of the mushrooms. If you think about 75 grams as a standard serving of mushrooms, to get 1 gram of beta-glucan from button mushrooms, you'll have to consume 2 servings a day of button mushrooms. To save time, I'll just move to the next point. Sorry, go back. I just want to say that this amount is higher than what the average Australian mushroom consumer is consuming, which is 60 grams per day. But the target population, somebody with hypercholesterolemia, for example, may be willing to make certain dietary choices to improve their cholesterol levels. Next slide. So just very quickly wrapping up, in summary, mushrooms have several attributes that can contribute to a healthy diet pattern. The current evidence is emerging. We've provided some in vitro proof of concept that it may reduce Agaricus Bisporus may reduce LDL cholesterol levels. Needs to be confirmed in clinical trials, though. But to achieve the amount of 1 grams, we need to consume around 150 to 300 grams of fresh raw Agaricus Bisporus mushroom. And then the last slide just have the names of a few people that I would like to acknowledge who has contributed to this research. Thank you very much, Emma.
Amazing. Thank you, Velma. So that was a fabulous taste of what you would learn on the Mushroom Health Science Australia about the cardiovascular benefits with some even more details, new information. And the idea is Mushroom Health Science Australia will grow over time as more research like the research that Velma just presented gets done. So it will grow with you. If you would like to, and we would love if you would visit Mushroom Health Science Australia to learn more, the QR code and the website are on the screen now. So now I would like to get Velma and Steph back to answer some questions. And we did have some questions from the audience, and I have a few questions as well. So we did have a question. I feel like this is for me because I did say that mushrooms are closer to animals, and then someone asked, how can we recommend them to vegans then? It's totally fine because from an evolutionary perspective, closer to animals. But from an ethical perspective and a nutrients perspective, definitely closer to plants. So definitely vegan safe. And I've not met a vegan who is concerned with the origin of mushrooms. Steph, we had a question about fermenting mushrooms. So we know that fermenting foods can have nutritional benefits. Have you ever fermented mushrooms, or how do you think that would go if tried?
Yeah, look, I haven't tried it myself, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't do it. And I suppose particularly if you ended up with, excess mushrooms, they're so nutritious, we don't want them to go to waste. So fermenting or pickling is a great way to be able to preserve them and not have that waste. And, I guess we're looking at kind of two factors there, like the nutritional profile of the mushrooms themselves, but then we know that the fermentation process has its own unique benefits as well. So yeah, I can't see why you couldn't do it. And if anything, you're probably getting, some more benefits from the fermentation process as well.
Try it out, whoever asked, and send us the results to the Mushroom Health Science Australia inbox. Tell us all about it. I'd love to know.
Yes.
The recipes that I've seen look great, but I have not had a chance to try any of them. Velma, can I ask you a big picture question? Because, we're mostly health professionals in one way, shape, or form here today, and you presented so much wonderful upcoming science. Can you give me the simple, if you're a health professional, what should you be doing given the context of this evidence and recommending that people eat mushrooms?
Yeah, sure. Even though while we're still waiting for the scientific evidence, I think there are so many reasons to include mushrooms in our diets in terms of health, cardiovascular benefits. As I mentioned, it has got many attributes like reducing saturated fats, reducing salt, potassium, prebiotics, antioxidants, vitamin D, etc. So many reasons to include it in your diet. If you have a client with hypercholesterolemia, while we're waiting for the evidence, I think it is a good idea to suggest mushrooms as an alternative source to increase beta glucan values. As I said, there's not many sources of beta glucan. We have oats and barley mostly. So having another source of beta glucan would be a good thing. So enhancing intake with 1 to 2 servings a day, I think can only do good and no harm.
Amazing. Love that. Someone said in the chat that you can pickle mushrooms and they go great in antipasto. Yes, I have had that before, of course, but not all pickles are fermented, let's remember. So different health benefits, but still a great way to eat them. Love that. I'm going to go back to the culinary question, Steph, about could you make a mushroom infused oil? So thinking like truffle oil here and maybe the same way we make the FODMAP. Low FODMAP oils for onions and stuff. Do you reckon you could do that with mushrooms?
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense that you could. We know we can do it with onions and garlic and lemongrass and ginger and stuff. So Yeah, it makes sense that you could do it, particularly for FODMAPs where, I mean, mushrooms can come into a FODMAP diet, but it's only around 7 grams is considered like the green light at one serving occasion. So it's not a lot. So I suppose if you still wanted to get like that mushroom kind of flavor in your meals, that could be a really great way to do it. I would probably just suggest to maybe try using the more mature, the larger varieties of mushrooms, because that will pack more punch in terms of flavor. Whereas the smaller ones might be a bit too mild to come through in an oil. But yeah, I think you could definitely do it.
Amazing. I'm going to try that as well. While we're on oils, someone's asked about those mushroom oil supplements that you can buy. And I'm going to go ahead and answer that and say, I personally would not recommend those over eating mushrooms because those products are very highly variable, and it will really depend on how they're created, what actually ends up in them. They're very expensive. And you also miss out on all of the other benefits of eating a mushroom because you'll only get the oil extracted nutrients and oil extracted bioactives. You're not going to get any of the water soluble ones. All of those great things Velma just talked about, they're not going to come out in an oil, and you don't get the joy of eating. So I would recommend mushrooms food first before going to those supplements 100%. Speaking of extraction, Velma, you showed the boiled and the raw. Why does this happen? It's different of the extraction in the boiled versus the raw and the fried.
Yeah, so we showed an increase in beta glucan levels in boiled mushrooms, but we didn't see that in the fried mushrooms. And the main reason for that is that boiling in a water medium breaks down the cell walls of the mushroom, which then results in leaching out of the components out of the mushrooms. Whereas in frying, you don't get that. Frying does not break down the walls in a similar way. And also, I guess it's a fat medium versus a water soluble medium. That's it. So it might be you can increase your beta glucan levels by boiling your mushrooms or adding it to foods like stews and risottos, etc.
Amazing. And Steph, this could fit in with the wet frying method for cooking, right? Because if you're doing it in water first, that has the culinary benefit, but could be doing exactly what Velma says, but in the fried, right?
Yes, totally. So yeah, there is a technique called the wet fry where I sort of talked about how if you put mushrooms in dry, they will start to release some of their own water, but you can actually add a bit of water. So it almost has that like boiling effect to begin with. And then once that water has evaporated, that's where then, you're getting the nutritional benefits there, but then you can go in with your fat and then you can start to get the flavor benefits of doing both. So yeah, the wet fry could be a good option for that.
We might need to get some other scientists onto this and compare dry fry to wet fry for nutritional and bioactive benefits. That would be very interesting. We also had a question about variety of mushrooms. And we focused on the Australian grown cultivated mushrooms, Agaricus Bisporus, today. For me, that's when we're foodies, we're very interested in the exotic mushrooms. But for me, most Australians are not eating enough fruits and vegetables, and I know not technically a fruit or a vegetable. Most Australians are not eating to the Australian dietary guidelines. And for me, the Agaricus Bisporus, whether they're the big portobellos or whether they're grated up or whether they're the cup or the Swiss brown, they're more your entry-level mushrooms that everyone can work with. Do you agree, Steph, that they're more user-friendly? They're very user-friendly, hard to go wrong with when you cook mushroom?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, as you said, it's that initial barrier of people not being familiar with their ingredients. And, our common Aussie mushrooms, people are already familiar with it. Yes, it might be a step up for them to start cooking with them, but let's start with what they're familiar with first. And of course, our foodies, like I would say my favorite mushroom is actually a lion's mane mushroom. But if anyone's actually seen what a lion's mane looks like, I think that would be pretty confronting for people that have to try and cook with that straight up. So I think if we can at least just get the common mushrooms in people's households, and then once they realize how easy and delicious they are, then they have the opportunity to explore the other varieties as well.
Velma, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, what I want to say is that we can't assume that all the different varieties will have the same health benefit. As I showed in our study, in our in vitro study, we showed that even though the samiji and oyster mushrooms had 5 times more beta glucan than the Agaricus bisporus, their bile acid binding capacity was less than that of Agaricus bisporus. So I would still really emphasize, yeah, as you said, increase those common mushrooms in our diet first. But nothing wrong with consuming the others.
Yeah. And there was also a question about foraging, and we absolutely do not encourage foraging for mushrooms in Australia. It's way too risky. And we know that the cultivated Australian mushrooms, the Agaricus Bisporus, are always going to be safe. So always get your mushrooms from a reputable grower, a supermarket, greengrocer, or your local farmers markets. Definitely don't go out looking for mushrooms for yourself, or if you do, just appreciate their beauty rather than their flavor. So that is all we have time for today. I am so grateful for all of you who have taken the time to attend, and we hope to see you soon on the Mushroom Health Science Australia website. Look out for us at some conferences coming up, including the Nutrition Society of Australia conference, if you will be there. I'd really like to thank Velma and Steph for sharing their time and energy with you today. I think that was a real beautiful taster of what you can find on the website. We would love to hear from you, get your feedback on today's event and on the Mushroom Health Science Australia website itself. I'd also like to once again thank Hort Innovation for their funding today's event, as well as funding the Mushroom Health Science Australia project. And we really do hope, that it does help you as health professionals in whatever role you play to be able to help get people eating more of these health promoting foods that are delicious and have so many fabulous benefits. So once again, thank you so much. We'll see you at our next event.